Kate Lester's leadership and success is based on three things: her passion for everything she does, her entrepreneurial zeal, and her commitment to people, whether that's her clients or her staff. Kate's an award-winning entrepreneur growing a successful organisation, Diamond Logistics, and it's my pleasure today to interview Kate as part of our series, Leaders in Conversation. Good morning, Kate, and welcome to Leaders in Conversation.
Morning, thank you for the opportunity.
Now, I know as a leader that you're always trying to push yourself and find new opportunities to push the boundaries and to challenge yourself. And I wanted to begin today by asking you about your recent trip to Nepal and to Mount Everest, because I'm really interested in why you did that, and also why now, and what was the reason behind it?
Well, I definitely have a thing about climbing mountains. It's a bit of a hobby of mine. So this is the third biggie on my list. I've done Kilimanjaro and Machu Picchu. So Everest was next on the list. And my dad did it over 20 years ago. And I remember him coming back, and my dad is rarely besotted, but he was, entirely besotted by his Everest trek. So I went out there, and it was a mixed experience, frankly. Nepal is a very underprivileged country, and it's challenging for me seeing people living in very different economic arenas. I found traveling in India really challenging before, and Nepal was very similar. The hygiene over there is appalling. The standard of accommodation is pretty poor as well. And I'm very much a culinary person, so that wasn't great. But in terms of the awe with which you view the Himalayas, that didn't leave me for the whole 2 weeks I was trekking. And parts of the trek were outstandingly beautiful in terms of, well, just your vista, really. It was just stunning. It's very challenging. I said that Kilimanjaro is like a 1,500 meters. So, all those kids doing those horrible Friday afternoon athletic days will know how difficult a 1,500 meters is, because you've got to run really fast for, quite a long time. But Nepal is equivalent to a marathon, and having done a marathon beforehand, it's 14 days, hard trekking, poor hygiene, no food, bad sleep, the effects of altitude. But the sense of achievement is quite huge. But yeah, so I've just got to think about climbing mountains. And I think climbing mountains is very much reflective of our journeys as people, really. People very rarely climb mountains alone. There's often a backup team. You face a lot of adversity. There's only one way up. You're going there regardless, so your destination is very fixed. And I think that's incredibly reflective of the rest of life, really, and particularly leadership.
And obviously there's a lot going on when you're in that environment, and a lot to think about, and you're in a very different place to, say, here at your head office or at home and so on. It's a very uncomfortable place, I imagine, in some cases, but does it still give you the chance to think and reflect on your leadership and to reflect on life a little bit, to put yourself in a completely different and adverse environment?
It's specifically why I choose to go to arenas like that in the world. In actual fact, in Nepal there is a lot of Wi-Fi, but I only turned my phone on at the end of the first week, at the end of the second week, and at the end of the third week to touch in with my team here. I know that I've got a good backup team, and I know that they do a really good job. We had a bit of a crisis at the end of the second week, and they treated it in exactly the same way that I would. But I think it's a shame to lose the opportunity to do that digital detox. The reality is that, we were just talking about how, I don't know if human biology has actually caught up with the sort of technical evolution that we've had over the last couple of years. And as leaders particularly, we need quiet time to think. I was walking my dog this morning and turned off my audio book, because as you know, I read hundreds of books. But I turned off my audio book because it was such a beautiful crest moon with a single star and the sun rising over the horizon. And I just thought, I need this quiet time to reflect. So losing a little bit of digital stimulation, allowing your brain to chew over a few things, and having time to reflect on the previous year, which has been a challenging one for a lot of people in business and education. And looking forward to 2019, it was a really good opportunity to do that.
So there's a real art to finding that space, isn't there, as a leader, to step back and to reflect and think about where you are and where you're going, and it's harder by the year, it seems, to find that space and not be overwhelmed by the noise.
I completely agree, but the only thing that you and I have control over in our days, effectively speaking, is the way we manage ourselves.
Yes.
And we cannot think of thinking time as a luxury. So I actually have a top tip for people who've got really busy brains and want to find time to actually have a bit of a think. I use that thinking time to do all the things in my house and life that aren't necessarily CEO caliber stuff, but I just can't sit and think. I'm not that kind of Rodin's thinker. You know, I need to be doing something. So whether it's cleaning out a drawer, doing my ironing, you know, doing the leaves in my garden, walking my dog, you know, I'm still multitasking, but you have to leave mental space to be able to come up with solutions and ideas. And if we find ourselves always at the coalface, then we're in reaction mode rather than strategic mode. And you know, as CEOs, I think we need to find 25% of our time to be thinking. You know, that's our job. Our job is to think.
Now, I want to come back to the leadership journey you've been on and the journey in building Diamond Logistics. Financial Times award-winning organisation for growth and
Future 100.
Future 100. So successful organisation. But before I come back to some of that, I want to go back to the beginning, if we can, and to ask this: when did the entrepreneur first emerge in Kate Lester?
When I was 12. So I went to work for my mum's boutique when she was 12. Actually, probably before that, actually. My dad's always worked for himself. He works for himself because it would be impossible to employ him. And I think I'm fairly similar, frankly. You know, we're pretty odd characters. There was a dual freedom as well as a huge work ethic that my dad always had. He always had his office. He was always working there until late in the evening. So hard work never frightened me. And my dad was very content with what he was doing. And so, you know, that seemed like a very viable way forward for me. I wasn't necessarily very conventional, so I didn't feel that I fitted very well into schools and a normal kind of remit or anything to that effect. And then, as I said, my mum got a boutique when I was 12, and very early into that, very early teens, I was running it by myself on a Saturday morning. And actually, we took the majority of the sales on a Saturday, of which I earned myself a very hefty commission. So I was very monetary led. I like making people happy, and at boutique you get a lot of opportunity to do that. I understood profit and loss, I understood margin, I understood, you know, motivation and responsibility. So the idea behind running your own business was never a secret or a mystery to me. So I think it's been part of me since day dot, really.
And was the leader in Kate Lester around at that time as well? So obviously you had the entrepreneurial zeal and you know, the determination to change things and make things better. But did the leader emerge at that time as well, or did that come?
Well, I'm lucky enough to be the firstborn, and I think so.
Yeah.
Therefore, you know, Adler would say that the firstborn has natural leadership tendencies anyway. I took on a lot of leadership roles at school, and I think that was very encouraging as well. You know, we'll come on, I hope, to talk about the importance of education and great teachers moving forwards. But yes, I think I've always been a leader out of preference as well. I mean, you know, I do like a little bit of the spotlight, and I think my, you know, little bits of, I used to call it self-importance, but now I deem it to be sort of self-regard, and you know, and I think I'm a good leader. So I've definitely improved my leadership skills over the last, you know, particularly 26, coming up to 27 years in business. But no, I certainly had no problem, you know, putting myself forward, no problem standing up in front of a crowd, no problem leading the school concert. So that was a natural thing for me.
Moving into the world, taking risks, finding your place and so on is a big challenge for this generation and setting themselves up. You at a young age took a big risk to go into, or you may well not have seen it as that has been a big risk at the time, but I imagine you did in setting up the organisation and going into business and pursuing your dreams. What was involved in that? What was the thought process when you decided, I don't want to slot in necessarily, I want to go out there and lead, but in order to lead I need to take risks and do something different?
There's a great saying excuse me, there's a great saying that says that change is either inspiration or desperation led. And I had two experiences only of sort of PAYE employment. And in the first one, I was sort of a self-trained economist, and I put forward a new organisational structure and a management reorganisation, which was very precocious, I'm sure, of an 18-year-old going into her first, sort of job, for it to be poached by the team leader of our section and then presented to the board, and for him to sort of like take all the credit for it. So I thought, oh, okay, this is my first, and the politics of a big office were just awful. I think Ricky Gervais's office was, fairly kind of similar to where I was working. And then the second job I went into was nearly 2.5 times the salary, which was great because I was very, very young. And it was a very entrepreneurial, and I was in the sales role, and I effectively managed to achieve a year's targets in 3 months. And I said to the guys there, you're wanting me to travel all around the UK. I've got a very old car. I want to invest in a new car. Can you please tell me that my job is secure because I'm taking out a loan and my dad's guaranteeing it, and I need to make sure that my income's going to be matched. And they said, yeah, absolutely, and all the rest of it. And then made me redundant because I'd achieved a year's sales targets in 3 months, a month later. So I'm stuck with this noose around my neck of this, car on HP. So after that, I went into the gig economy. I was 19 years old. I went into the gig economy. I did everything from working in a pub to being a cleaner, to being someone's housekeeper, which was the old-fashioned version of the gig economy. So it's a myth to say that the gig economy hasn't been around forever. It has been around forever, but it was just been more... dare I say, working class trades that we all used to be involved in. So I was in the gig economy when I was 19, 20, and part of that was working for a courier company that was in Guildford. And it became very, very apparent when they couldn't pay us our wages before Christmas 1991 that the business was going down the pan. And I just thought that there wasn't too much to it. I was always a little bit of a petrol head, so I like my motorbikes and my cars. I'm also quite salt of the earth, so I appreciated the honesty of the courier business. And there was a beautiful finiteness of it in that every delivery was completed in a singular day, so you kind of went home knowing that you'd had a complete day, and I'm a completer finisher, so that was really good for me. And it was also incredibly service-led because we had to respond to people's requests within 15 minutes. And I thought that was the ultimate in terms of service delivery, really. You don't get lawyers doing that, or accountants, or, whatever, but you do in same-day logistics. So the industry appealed to me, and, I've since found that it appeals to quite a lot of quirky people. And eventually the business was clearly continuing to go downhill. The proprietor had withdrawn from the business that was being run on her behalf, and myself and a courier at the time put forward an offer to take on board the goodwill. Unfortunately, by the time that offer came to the table, the controller, who's the guy who runs all the vehicles, had walked with half the revenue and started up his own courier company. And so I effectively went to the remaining customer and the landlord and said, can I take over the premises? And, if I get together a merry band of couriers, can I, do the work for you? And that was it. We were born. 4 months later, I had to buy my partner out due to an irregularity, shall we say, in terms of the way he was equipping our company vehicles. And, from May 1992, I've run the business pretty much single-handed.
So it sounds to me like there wasn't necessarily a weighing up of risk or taking a chance. This was driven by what people wanted, what customers wanted, what the market wanted, and you were very much focused on responding to that, and you knew that it was going to work because you were serving the needs of those that were out there in the marketplace. But I think I'm really interested to follow this up a little bit more, because in some industries and in some sectors, that sense of market can become quite distorted. And whether you're serving a regulator, whether you're serving a bank manager, whether you're serving, but the sense of the customer at the heart of things it can be lost. But it seems to me like that's what's driven you from the beginning. And have you held on to that, and without thinking too much about what do the directors want, or what does the bank manager want, or what do the regulators want, and made sure that you've kept the customer at the heart
Because I think it's a very simple business model. So once you start adding layers of regulation, etc., what you have got within those regulations is much higher standards. So entry into those markets is much more difficult to get into.
Yes.
And you've obviously got rules and compliance that you have to adhere to. Yeah. Logistics is like the wild, wild west. You know, if you want to talk about the entry level for a courier person, it's a van and a phone. You know, there's very few. You know, there are professional bodies now, and you know, anybody of any quality will be part of the Institute of Couriers and the RHA and the UKWA, which is the Warehousing Association. But ultimately speaking, the lower your entry bar is, you know, the more competition you've got, and the more underhand behaviour you've got, and the more strong you have to be in the face of that. So that's a real challenge. Also, logistics is really straightforward. It's very easy to say whether you've done your job. You know, so you know, in the purest form of our art, it is collecting a package A and delivering it to B. Where our art becomes a challenge is that we have a finite amount of resources every day and incredibly variable demand. So we can go from 70% of demand in a day to 150%, and the art of logistics is actually enabling that 100% completeness still to happen regardless of demand. So that's where the secret sauce is, but it is very easy to know whether your customers are happy. And you know, ultimately speaking, there's a lot of competition as well. So you have to be good to stay in business for 27 years.
Yes, and I'm thinking, you know, particularly about the academy sector, but also about the public sector as well, and the charity sector. The fact that there are leaders out there wanting to be creative, wanting to respond to the needs of their market, for want of a better word, the children, young people, or the end users. But sometimes the focus can be taken away by regulation, compliance, government expectations and policy. And it seems to me that we need to find a bit more of that freedom for leaders to innovate and be creative. What would your advice be to leaders in that situation where they're managing the weather, as it were, around them, but at the same time needing to focus on the market and make sure they deliver? There's
a very key bit of what you've said there, and it's what is your end user? End user of what? You know, is the end user the child that's being educated? Is the end user the society that requires, you know, contributing young adults to join us? Do you see what I mean? So what is the end user? So it's the definition of the needs of those people. So if we're talking about the needs of the children, you know, we're talking about their ability to withstand challenging economic conditions and a hugely shifting society. And I think that's very interesting. You know, we want to develop contributing young adults that are going to be able to give to society. But equally speaking, industry wants a certain brand of person that's going in there, and I think it's industry that are complaining a lot about millennials at the moment. You know, they talk about lack of grit and lack of, you know, persistence, and there are elements that need building into that. So how do you deal with building that into children who are finding stuff really kind of unstable? But you know, we've done an awful lot of work in terms of what we call personas or avatars here, and you know, I think that's a very good idea for people, even within the educational sector, to think about. You know, and we've got dual personas as well. So we don't just have our end users; we've also got our franchisers who actually deliver the business on behalf of our end users. So we have to define what our franchisers look like and what our end client actually looks like. So similarly speaking, in the educational sector, you've got to look at the requirements and needs of the children and the requirements of needs of society and industry that needs those resources in order to perpetuate us all.
So you mentioned the franchises and the scale of the business that you've created over the years. Just going back to the early days, and as you embarked on growth and the development of the company, what were the key appointments for you as a leader in terms of your senior team, in terms of the growth of the business, where you were able to begin to step back a little bit and not be entirely the driving force and entirely the person that was in the heart of the operation, making sure that everything was being done well and that operations were effective, that customers were happy? How did you make that transition from Kate Lester being at the heart of the business, leading from the front, to creating the scale?
I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this because Kate Lester's still very much at the heart of the business and still leading from the front because I'm extraordinarily passionate about what I do. You know, I'm incredibly proud of what we've achieved here at Diamond and particularly the type of company that we've created.
Yeah.
You know, we're got really strong values of shared success and being a great company to work with, trust and belong to, and under-promising and over-delivering. And that's been very, very passionate right from the start. However, in terms of key first employment, it was, I can tell you exactly when it was. It was literally months after my business started. And I recruited my first, you know, sort of office manager, purely because I was pregnant. I managed to conceive the business and my daughter in the same week, a story which horrifies my daughter, as I recount it quite frequently. And so I had a deadline, a very confirmed deadline in terms of needing to take what ended up being 2 weeks off in terms of maternity leave. And that person enabled, you know, who was doing the day-to-day operation, enabled me to go off and do the business development. What's really interesting, though, is that, of course, the people that can help you in the initial stages may be the people that hinder you in the latter stages. So my business stayed small for 20 years, half by design and half by my lack of knowledge, because I was bringing up my children and needed more of a lifestyle type business. But equally speaking, because I don't think I necessarily recruited the right resources in order to be able to scale the business. So, you know, other fundamental recruits in about 2011 were the people that added know-how and brains that I didn't necessarily have in order to scale the business. And now, of course, I've got a very strong leadership team of 5 people, and a headquarters team. And in fact, I think, you know, our employee numbers are still pretty low in our 2 sites that we've got here and headquarters. We're still sub 30. But in terms of the people that I'm responsible for, in terms of the ship I'm captaining, we've probably got 200-300 people, you know, working within that organisation now. So your business certainly won't grow, or your organisation won't fly without, you know, the key recruits that will enable you to focus on the bits that you should be doing. So the sooner you can do it, the better. But recruit right, because of course we've had a difficult year this year because, you know, some of my latter appointments haven't been right and haven't been great fits either.
So is there a process you went through as CEO of the business where, particularly, you talked about recruiting the team with knowledge and the skills to scale up the business? Was there a process you went through where you recognised the bits that you couldn't necessarily do, and you came to that realisation? How did you come to that realisation, and was it hard to do that, or was it quite simple?
No, I don't think I was very good at it at all, actually. I've been very much an opportunity entrepreneur. Key trajectory points for me have been based on opportunity, and of course that means that it's not necessarily that well evaluated, which is why I probably had quite a lot of failure on the journey. You know, I now know it's part of that, and it was persistence that kind of gets you through that. But it became I was very much the strategist and very much the economist and very much the business modeler, as well as the business developer, which is an odd combination to be sales and strategy.
Yes.
But that's very much my job here, and marketing and rah-rah, I guess. But the bit that I don't have huge tacit knowledge nor interest, quite frankly, is the machinations of the operations. So they're the people that I recruit. But luckily for me, that means, you know, there's, you know, quite a lot of people that love the I-dotting, T-crossing, you know, elements of logistics. I'd rather do the meet and greet and you know, and the motivation and the strategy. So I always say that our business is like a really rich tapestry, and where organisations, I think, become really stuck is when the CEO is recruiting people that are just like her or him. What you need to do is to recruit a vibrant multitude of colours, and then you'll make a great organisation or a great tapestry. You know, you want to specifically recruit people who have opposite talents to yourself in order to have a very well-balanced leadership team. We did a Belbin, do you know Belbin, the Belbin report? It's really worthwhile looking into, and it talks about, you know, completer finishers, you know, motivators, specialists in terms of knowledge and all the rest of it. And you need, you know, people that are making up all different elements of that in order to have a strong organisation. So perhaps, again, you know, if you're trying to recruit a very sturdy leadership team, do a Belbin assessment and see what gaps you've got in terms of, what you need for a successful organisation, and test people at their recruitment accordingly to see whether they end up being that bit of the jigsaw that you haven't quite got yet.
So it's about traits as well as skills and expertise.
Absolutely, yeah.
One of the things that you referred to there was the employer of choice element to this. It was implied in what you were saying that you want to attract the best people and have a team of highly motivated people, and you're the motivator. What have you done as an organisation to ensure that, not just in terms of the senior leadership team, but also across the organisation, that the best people, talented people, motivated people are kind of enthused to apply to Diamond Logistics? What is it about the organisation that you've done to draw in that talent and to hold on to people as well?
It's all about the C word, and I know people use it a lot, but it's culture. It's all about culture. We're very, very Vegemite. You guys over here would say Marmite, but we're very Vegemite. People either like it or they hate it. And we did a recent franchise client and an employee experience, and we've got a great big black hole of people who drop off very, very quickly from all three of those, client avatars for us, because they don't engage in the culture. So we spend a long time recruiting. When we're talking about culture, it's not just naturally who you are, it's the values you adhere to. I know that the values stick like glue in this place because we created them rather than me impose them, and that's very important as well, because they're not going to gain traction if it's a top-down exercise. It's got to be something that the whole organisation believes in and adheres to, and it's got to be stuff that truly exemplifies what you do every day. So we are a partnership-based model. We truly believe in partnership. I truly believe in a huge, efficient headquarters and a devolvement of responsibility, operationally speaking, and profit to our regional franchises, so that they can really deliver really good services. So that means we have to run a really efficient HQ team. And that dictates the way that we run our business. Shared success is incredibly important. So if you're going into a deal and you think you're doing someone over or someone's doing you over, then it's not the deal for us. So that makes it really straightforward. Being a really great company to work with rather than for, so work with, trust and belong to, that's really straightforward. So, if it's an HR decision or whatever, I'll often get Charlotte saying, well, that's not being a really great company to work with, trust and belong to, is it? And then that's great that she's singing those values more than me. And the under promise, over deliver, the marketing team hate it. Because of course that's the least, consumer rah-rah kind of thing that you could come up with. But it's really straightforward, and it's basically do what you say you're going to do, and that's incredibly important. So, but you can't have it so complex that it has no traction. People have got to be able to recite these values at you more than you recite them at yourself. Yes. The culture's got to be tangible, and we had evidence of that working quite recently when we engaged an IT team to develop our new logistics platform, Dispatch Lab, and they went round and actually went out to our sites, that are franchises, because when you're scaling a business, of course, you can be a little bit frightened because you've got these people that are acting independently on your behalf in these regions. But if you've recruited good people that culturally speaking are aligned with you, then I think you're 80% of the way. The 20% is the operations bit. And they went into offices and they said they're more diamond than diamond. Now, if you can do that in a franchise network, then, very much in an owned organisation or, a collection of multi-academy trusts, and you can sustain that culture.
And you referred there to the franchise model, and in scaling up the business, you've moved to a franchise model where you have people representing the organisation in different parts of the country, delivering on your behalf, having that interaction with your customers and clients, with the Diamond brand at the forefront. It seems to me that in growing as a leader, you've also done a lot of letting go and a lot of distribution of leadership. But in terms of the franchises, how have you managed that relationship so that you can guarantee the quality, guarantee the values and the culture, but at the same time give people on the ground in those franchises the ownership in the sense of this is I have some autonomy here and I can contribute and feel some ownership of the business as well.
Well, guarantee is a very strong word, and don't forget, you know, when I spoke at your conference, one of the things I spoke to you about is that I deliver parcels. You guys are delivering young adults into society. It's entirely unparalleled in terms of the importance, and sometimes I do have to remind an irate client that it is just a bloody parcel that's being delivered. So, you know, don't underestimate the magnitude of what your listeners have to deliver and what we have to deliver. So we've got to keep it all into perspective. But the bit that I like to think about in terms of what we deliver to our franchisers is that we give them an opportunity to build a logistics business. Now, building a business is something that I get really passionate about. But not only do we build the business of the local franchises, we're building the businesses of the businesses that they're working and delivering for. So as a result of that, we're effectively sponsoring small entrepreneurship all around the UK, and that's where I'm really impassioned. So we've recruited people just like I used to be in the first 20 years of my business that just needed all the tools that they wanted in order to deliver really good local delivery services. And as a result of that, you know, I've got clients that I've been working with nearly 27 years now. I've still got my first client, you know, I've been working with an F1 racing team for over 20 years, you know, well, 20, oh gosh, actually too many years and I want to count really. And the only reason in a very, very competitive market that we've retained clients that long is because we deliver really good service. And you know the reason I delivered really good service? Because my mortgage depended on it. And it's the same for all the franchises we've got around the UK. They have got skin in the game. Their lives and families depend on it. Now, you've got no greater sense of accountability in terms of that. That's not to say that stuff hasn't gone wrong. You know, we had quite a steep attrition rate in the first few years of our franchises, some of which we've bought in-house, some of which we've merged, and that was an important part of us cutting out that kind of quality. But again, in logistics, we could afford to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and shift and change.
Yes.
In education, you know, you've got a responsibility right from day dot. So, you know, as for guarantees, there are no guarantees. But I think if you start with culture and you start with recruitment and you start with people sharing the values with what you're trying to deliver, you know, operationally speaking, the machinations of what you've got to deliver stuff with is a secondary element of that.
So society is becoming more complex, industry is becoming more complex, and education certainly is. And as I've said a number of times in this interview, you know, the pressures on mental health, the rise of technology, the changing jobs market, and the way in which children's lives and the work of schools is changing so rapidly as well. And partnerships are a really important part of that, and choosing the right partners well, the partners that can kind of add value to what you're doing, but at the same time you can reciprocate and add value. And in your industry and in your organisation, Kate, I imagine along the way in building this organisation and moving towards success, you must have had to have chosen your partners very, very carefully, but partners that are on board, that add value, that don't take you for granted, and that you're both, you know, gaining from the relationship in your own way. Tell me about what partnership means to you beyond the organisation, and where it's gone well, but actually where it may not have gone well.
I think the essence of a good partnership versus a bad partnership is to make sure you've got equal skin in the game and that it is mutually beneficial. There is nothing as pointless as having a partnership which everybody is trying to take something from. A partnership has got to be about what you believe that you can give. And again, this is the basis of humanity, really, isn't it? Ultimately speaking, if it is a purely commercial contract, then there will be an element of exploitation. And I don't know if you guys have got room for that in your sector. You know, I think you need to be looking at stuff whereby you can truly mutually align aims and get something which is a mutually beneficial outcome even. So, you know, we've spoken about industry and school collaboration, so that, you know, the industry can attract the kind of school leavers that they need in order to support their business moving forward. And the school can, you know, create partnerships, you know, in terms of, you know, tailoring curriculums and supporting students in their employment afterwards. Now that to me seems a really beautiful, you know, mutual collaboration. But I think in order to get it right is that A, please leave egos aside at the door. B, make sure that people have got equal skin in the game, that it's mutually beneficial, like our shared success element of it. And choose your partners as carefully as you choose your clients, your franchises, or your employees, or your teachers. It's got to be a very slow courtship in order to know that culturally, speaking, you're a good fit. Because ultimately I know that going back in all the relationships that I have failed and cost me many millions of pounds over the last 27 years, I knew in my heart of hearts they were bad eggs right from the start, and it was either agreed or thinking it's the fastest way to the outcome that I was looking for that made me overlook my inherent gut vibe about these people, and by overcoming that, I ended up making a bad collaboration, decision. Collaborate with people you like. There you go. There's the big answer. Collaborate with people that you like, and that people that are in it for their contribution, not what they can get out of it. And then I think you'll find it will be really mutually beneficial.
Now tell me about risk, because I'm really intrigued about risk, because to get to the place you have 25 years in running the same business, growing the same business, and constantly putting the client and the customer at the heart of that, but also a motivated team. But along the way, the economy has been on a bumpy ride. We had the crash 10 years ago, of course. There's disruption of technology. What risks have you taken in that period to make sure not only the business is growing, but it survives? And of course, at the heart of this, of course, you've got a team, you've got a mortgage, you've got a family. How do you deal with risk, and what have the key risks been?
Oh my goodness. Well, I started in 1992, so if you remember, that was peak people handing their keys back. And so I'm very used to running a business in adverse circumstances, and that has given me very good stead. My dad has been great at predicting risk. So when we went into what was the fallout from 2008, actually I don't think that really impacted on industry in the UK until 2010, 2011. And I went into that with a little bit of a war chest, which is why we were able to kind of expand at that point in time. But ultimately speaking, you end up having to put your money where your mouth is. So as I told you, when the banks weren't lending in 2011, 2012, i.e. my bank said we have quote unquote no appetite for lending, I sold a house and chucked the money into the pot because I saw opportunity, and I saw opportunity at that time. So in terms of my adversity to risk, I'm clearly not that risk adverse, but they're very calculated risk, because my life, particularly for the first 20 years, I was bringing up 2 children. Yes. It was very important to sustain them in the lifestyle and the place that we lived in Hazelmere in Surrey. And I was a single parent as well, with no support from my ex-partner. So, the reality is that I guess that was quite stressful, sustaining all of that, yes, yet still wanting to develop the business. When I became less risk adverse in 2011, that's when we started to scale the business. So you've very much got to balance your appetite for risk and where you want your business to go. I think it's like 99% of businesses don't turn over £1 million in revenues. And for everybody in there, between £1 million and £10 million worth of revenues, the amount of rubbish you have to go through, and personal adversity and challenge and cash flow and getting used to people being horrid and all that kind of stuff is completely not worth it. It's only past that you get like a little bit of a blue sky kind of moment, and then you start facing all the challenges of a corporate business. So it's definitely been challenging, but I take calculated risks. They're not risks that I don't believe that I will get return on eventually. So we'll see how that pans out. Get back to me in 5 years' time.
But it sounds like in those times of adversity, and some would say austerity, 2011, 2012, and even now for many organisations, you continue to invest. You continue to invest in business, but in a very kind of strategic, thoughtful way. Is that fair to say that you didn't stop investing? You just perhaps invested differently? Or?
Yes. Well, there was always a transfer of assets, probably some people would deem inappropriately, from my personal assets to business assets. But in the event of not having any sort of investor funding, we've always been privately funded, then you've got to put your money where your mouth is, really, haven't you? And I believe it was an accountant who said to me at the time, or a finance director at the time, that she said this economy will only get moving when entrepreneurs sell their houses and chuck the proceeds in their business to scale it, because the banks weren't lending. So any business that scaled from 2011, 2012 did that in the face of having no finance available. So since then, of course, we have been able to finance the business, and we've invested nearly £1 million into Dispatch Lab, and that's been huge capex in the face of all this Brexit uncertainty. So that has been kind of crazy. But if you looked at my salary in terms of London-based CEO stuff, I could probably have earned more pro rata over the period of my lifetime, but I wouldn't have got the return in terms of the capital value of the business over that period of the lifetime either. Yes. But I think investment's incredibly important, and I was talking to you about how much I like the book Leaders Eat Last, and I take my stuff from the business when the business has had everything it needs, and if you want to grow a scale business, that's what I think you need to do.
So Kate, you spent some time with many dozens of Academy Trust CEOs earlier this year at the National MAP Leaders Conference, and I know they really enjoyed hearing from you a range of things, not least the number of book recommendations you made to them. But it was a really valuable session. And I know that the pressures that Academy Trust CEOs face are huge. At the moment, there's a big funding challenge for the education sector. They're at the same time having to grow the organisations to make them more sustainable, and to kind of broaden the opportunities they've got to create that rich educational experience for pupils. There's a recruitment challenge in the sector. It's a time of huge opportunity for people that are very new to the CEO role, but also having to deal with some of the issues that an entrepreneurial leader has to do in balancing, growth and investment with taking care of the resources you have and growing them sustainably. So I'm really, really keen to get your reflections on what you heard from the CEOs on that day, but also the advice you'd give them, because some are managing to do this task and to do it exceptionally well. Others are facing real challenges in doing it.
I think the analogy I use is that business is like farming, but in normal business, we get to choose where we put our farm, we get to choose what we put on the farm, we get to choose the tools that we till the soil with, and we get to choose the seeds. The bit that we don't have in business is that we've got no opportunity to impact on the weather, so the weather being the economy or politics or whatever it is.
Yes.
Whereas as MAT CEOs, you don't get to choose where to put the farm, you don't get to choose what you're putting on the farm, you don't get to choose the seeds or the tools, and you can't impact on the weather either. I think since exploring that further, I've taken into consideration the bits that you do have in education that we don't necessarily have in commerce. So, for example, sales, in terms of pupil numbers and all the rest of it. When you've got catchment areas and all the rest of it, then you don't have to think about that so much. Yes, you may have budgetary challenges, but you have a fixed level of expenditure on an annual basis, and that's a beautiful thing to look at moving forward as well. Having to be a sales-led organisation, we don't necessarily know if our clients are going to stay with us or not. You can probably book in yours for a sort of 5-year period, I'm guessing, so that's a good thing too. But so there's always going to be challenges in any kind of industry. You guys have regulation, you have stability, you have format, you have outline. Logistics is the wild, wild west. So there's pros and cons in every business. But in terms of what as CEOs we can control, it's basically us, right? So the one thing you can control more than anything else is the personal attributes that you can develop within yourself, and also within the leaders within your organisation. It was very interesting that we were talking earlier, weren't we, about CEOs and longevity in tenure. And how the most successful CEOs within the Multi-Academy Trust have an ability to have that longevity and tenure. So developing that persistence and resilience, I think, is incredibly important. And fighting your corner too, when you believe that something is right and it is the right way to do it. We were also talking about taking advice. So, you know, there can be an awful lot of people telling you what to do as a CEO, but ultimately speaking, you've got to choose your own path and lead your team with you down that. I think that longevity and tenure, some things take a long time. You know, if I look back on my business plans that I made in 2012, I thought we'd be on 3 times the revenues that we are now, but I didn't know what I didn't know. So, you know, this last 5 to 7 years has been the time that it's taken to do the stuff that I've needed it to take. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So, you know, you've seen some very good successes in the Multi-Academy Trust where you've had that longevity of tenure from a CEO. So if you've got longevity of tenure, it's like any long relationship, right? You can have your ups, you can have your downs, you can have your successes, you can have your fails, you know, and you need to be supportive of yourself and your team throughout that kind of period. And I think you also need a culture of establishing peer support as well. You know, we were talking about where we get advice from, and bar my mum and dad and books, I think having a group of people who are in a similar circumstance to myself in terms of, you know, revenues of business or, you know, similar size companies is incredibly important. So, you know, what you guys do in order to bring those CEOs together and they can create their own friendship networks, that would be very, very supportive for them, because ultimately, and I think this is true of all CEOs, you know, we can't be too vulnerable. We have to be leaders. It's our job as leaders to suck it up a bit on behalf of our teams. And sometimes at the end of the day, that can be a lonely place to be, but knowing that you've got a peer group of support around you can be incredibly nurturing and incredibly supportive, and they're the people that you can be a bit more vulnerable and real with. So,
Yes.
you know, just seek cautiously the company with whom you show your vulnerability. And that's not to say that you need to remain a despotic leader, you know, that's always positive and you know, seeing the upside and stuff, but it is, you have a job and a responsibility as a leadership to take on board a far bigger burden than the rest of your team, because that's your job.
Yes.
You know, and you know, as I said, go read Leaders Eat Last. It's a really good book.
So you were an entrepreneur from the beginning, Kate, and have been ever since. I'm thinking back to the time when you entered the world of work, and you know, you mentioned the gig economy existed then, and that there was certainly uncertainty at that time. We're now in a new phase where the gig economy is even more prevalent, where technology is changing industry, and you know, we're seeing the retail sector, the manufacturing sector being revolutionised, really, and a new generation of children, young people entering the economy, whether that's for self-employment or in employment or otherwise. What would, as an employer, your advice be to children, young people, and also to the schools and trusts that are preparing them for this very uncertain and challenging world? What are you looking for as an employer? But actually, what are the traits and experiences that you feel children, young people should be experiencing and developing?
Well, I think firstly, it's very important to know that there are absolutely no stereotypes. So this concept of a typical millennial is an absolute myth. So this whole branding of a generation is just nonsense and media speak. So, you know, A, that is completely irrelevant. B, there will always be a gig economy and the need for self-employment. And that gives people the opportunity now to be flexible if they wish to do so. But I know that there's really big employers out there, you know, like the Big Four accountancies and you know, like BAE Systems and people like that. They are absolutely dying to have people who want to do a long-term career with them, who they put 30 years worth of investment in, and that they have a, you know, an interesting and challenging and evolving career. So if young people do want careers like that, there are plenty of organisations out there that are dying for people who are willing to, you know, have that job for life, because they're trying to build the CEOs for the future as well. And a lot of people, you know, wanting to build CEOs leaders for the future, want to recruit them from a ground level position and have them educated in the company's culture and knowledge and know-how over a long period of time, so that they know that they're passing the reins on to somebody who knows the business very, very well. So I think the reality is that, as you say, out of the last 27 years, I've been through 3 recessions and a Brexit vote, numerous governments. The economy always goes up and down. I think it's the technology element of it that makes people feel unempowered, compared, disenfranchised and undermined. So again, it goes back to that whole point of harnessing technology for our good rather than technology harnessing us. As for what I believe we need to build into sort of young people, or what I think it would be great if the education establishments could actually help us with, is that people have to understand there are winners and losers. So let's stop having medals for everybody who wins in sports days, etc., etc. Someone's going to win, someone's going to lose. The school experiences I had were all some were very, very challenging, but you get to know what it's like to be the people that don't get on with people very well, the person that's a little bit marginalised, being uncomfortable at school, socialisation and all that kind of stuff. That's what creates weirdos and oddbods that come on and become entrepreneurs. Don't go seeking labels for yourself. I was recently diagnosed as being quite possibly Aspergic, which is a label that would not have been useful to me, loads of years ago, or dyspraxic. And I don't think that would have been useful to me. That would have, challenged me in terms of how I felt I could deal with things. I just found different things to kind of work around things. We have to understand that stuff is tough. Like whether it's tough trying to relate to a teacher you don't like, or tough trying to fit in, or tough persisting with something. Life is tough. Life is hard, and unless you're tough on yourself, I think life can be even tougher. Do you know what I mean? So there's a lot to do with discipline, a lot to do with resilience, a lot to do with picking yourself up and dusting yourself off. A lot of understanding who we are and what we can contribute, and focusing on our positive attributes, not the things that we can't do. And also being able to take criticism on the chin. Constructive criticism is an incredibly positive way of instigating great life change. And we have 360 feedback here within the business, so people will call me out as well as everyone else, and knowing stuff that I do wrong in my leadership role or in anything else that I do in the business is an important way of changing the way I can behave, and an important way of changing the way the business behaves, so that we can improve in the future. Yes. So being able to be self-critical, I think, is really important too.
Where do you get your best advice from? And where have you got your best advice from over the years?
Books, absolutely. So I'd be very cautious in taking advice from friends and family who don't have experience in the scale of the business that you're trying to develop, or the sector that you're in. And the reason I say this is that friends and family can be best intentioned, and their intention is to safeguard you and make sure that you're okay. But if I followed everybody's advice, I wouldn't have scaled my business to the way that it is now. If I followed my girlfriend's advice now, I'd be exiting, not going into a second phase of scale. And ultimately speaking, you've got to listen to your own inner voice. I'm incredibly introspective. So if you did a Myers-Briggs assessment of me, I'm an introvert, believe it or not, rather than an extrovert. So I listen to my own mantra. But that's not to say that I don't take on board an awful lot of advice, which is hence the reason I read, dozens of books every year, dozens and dozens and dozens of books a year. And I just filter it. And you need to have a very big filter on advice and make your own mind up as to what you think is the right thing to do. That being said, by the way, I will say I still speak to my mum and dad all the time. So, sort of age 46, 47, if I ever want any relationship advice, it's definitely to my mum. And if if we want to talk about the economy or politics, it's definitely my dad. Not that I share his views, I hasten to add, but, so good old mum and dad and books and learning.
And what is your perspective on the changing pressures and demands on leaders in the next few years? How do you think? We know we're in an economy that's full of disruption in terms of technology and the way that the industry responds to that. We know that you know, the pressures on people are in some ways unprecedented, and children and young people particularly, in terms of the pressures in their day-to-day lives. As leaders, how do we respond to that disruption and that change, and how are you as a leader preparing to take your organisation into the next stage? What do you envisage being the key challenges and that are presented to you?
Well, I think we have to get back to people and humanity, and actually why we're doing all this for, and the things that are important to us. Because, you know, technological advances, economic disruption, uncertainty, political upheaval, we won't mention the B word. You know, the reality is that these are all elements that are entirely outside of our control. What we have to do is to take control of the things that we can have some remit over. So I think we have to look at the pursuit of happiness and understanding gratitude, understanding that to be human is to be humane, is to look after people, is to nurture, to think about all the skill sets that we have as human beings that technology cannot replace, and stop being harnessed by technology and harness the technology for our means instead. Yes. You know, yeah. I think, you know, you've only got to look on a train station in Guildford where you've got 98% of people engaged with their telephones. You've only got to look at a couple out for dinner whereby you've got people looking at their telephones. Let's build on the things as humans which are going to be the things that differentiate us and ultimately give longevity and wholeness to our society moving forward. So harness tech, focus on humanity and being human. And also we've got to incorporate this element of happiness and gratitude. You know, we've got to teach children how grateful they should be to living in a great country such as the UK that I live in voluntarily. You know, we're safe, you know, we're warm, we're educated, we've got healthcare. You know, I travel wildly and widely around the world, and really that contrast between the two I think is really important. And you know, you've got to be happy about the small things every day, because there's so many other things, wider things that we could be very unhappy about. So yeah, very, very traditional values there.
But it seems to me, Kate, you're a person and you're an organisation that put people at the heart of what you do, and that sense of humanity and that sense of belonging to the same kind of community and to one another. And I think whether that's the customer at the heart of what you do, or it's people that work in the organisation, I think that's come through really, really strongly today. And I think that's a big secret to your success, actually, the fact that you put people at the heart of what you do. And it's very easy, I think, in this rapidly changing society where technology is overwhelming us, that we lose that sense of people. So that's a great message I'm taking from today, and I want to thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.